I mean, I suppose we should get something accomplished every now and then. Welcome back to the Lost Cause Ranch. You guys last saw this discovery a little over a month ago when we headed out to Omaha.
Omaha of all places. That's right, we're meeting up with my buddy Joe from Lost Cause Ranch, who does nothing but old Land Rovers.
And met up with the Fast Lane guys, or probably better known to you that watch my channel as the guys from TFL Off-Road. And we grabbed Tommy's new ultra clean Discovery 1. But like many old Land Rovers, this one was not without issue. And as you saw as we tore it apart last time, namely 2 issues. Head gaskets. Super uncommon. Weird, right? But today we're taking breaks from cutting Land Rovers in half, and we are going to get a Land Rover back into proper working order, namely the type of order that the coolant stays in the engine and doesn't spit back out the exhaust. So these guys here are why we had to let the disco sit for about a month. We pulled the cylinder heads off right before Christmas and the New Year's and dropped them off at the machine shop, and understandably so, it took a couple weeks to get them all ready, with it being the holidays. But man, was it worth it. Just look how nice those look. We ended up having them do a valve job on it and clean the seats and everything up. Most of the intake valves were leaking, but everything is all sealed up and looking very, very nice. You just can't beat a nice machine finish and everything being clean. One thing we didn't have to wait for was all the parts and gaskets. We called up our buddies at Lucky 8 and they had all of these to us in 2 days. New York to Iowa in 2 days right before Christmas. So we've been sitting on a load of parts for this guy. We got our L-ring head gaskets, and in this bag is what is going to make all the difference while going back together. We have our ARP head studs. This is going to make sure we have a consistent clamping force across our nice and perfectly flat cylinder heads. We're also going to upgrade it with a Pro Flow La Bomba de Agua, or water pump. That, along with a whole new set of hoses, is hopefully going to keep this guy's coolant in check so that we don't have, so that Tommy doesn't have this issue again. We're trying to make this thing as reliable as possible when it leaves here. So we're also gonna do a set of MagnaCore plug wires on it, and we'll do a set of fresh lifters. But before we get the cylinder heads back on it, we are going to tackle this, and that is freshening up the oil pump system. We have a brand new gear here to replace the old and slightly worn one that was on there before. Like I said last time, we're also gonna switch Tommy out with a known good cover. His had a little bit of scoring, nothing that I would necessarily worry about running on my own vehicle, but if it's going halfway back across the country, we're gonna make sure it's as good as possible. I had this one laying around, so I'll just trade him out and I'll keep that other one as my spare. So for that, we need to rip the oil pan back off and we'll get the bottom buttoned up. So we're gonna get the new gear in, and when I put these in, I pack them full of Vaseline. Keep everything lubed up, and what that does is it fills all the little gaps and everything, and that way when we're sucking up through the pickup, it helps it create pressure right away instead of letting this thing grind against itself until you get initial oil pressure. Not necessarily on the later ones, but I've seen it on the earlier ones where people have eaten up a brand new gear by not getting them primed. They don't like to suck air. Get it all up in there, and we'll just wipe the excess off. Get our cover on. We got the front of the block cleaned up as well. When you get this far into repairing an engine, if you're trying to do a nice repair, a lot of your time is spent cleaning. We probably like double the amount of time it would take if we just tore it apart, slapped it back together by cleaning everything. But it does make you feel good when everything just looks nice and fresh. We got our brackets all cleaned up. The intake runners just look so much better clean. Essentially what I'm saying is, if you're gonna do a job like this, you may as well do it right. Have a little pride in your work, and on top of that, it just makes everything that much easier down the road. We can find oil leaks easier. It's a Land Rover, so there's a chance it's gonna come back apart again at some point in time in its life, and it's just gonna be less of a mess that time. We got our fresh timing cover gasket sitting there. We got the oil pump gear lined up roughly with the keyway here, but we'll probably have to adjust it a little bit as we slide it on. There we go. And perfect. Oil pan is ready to go on now. Pickup tube is clean. Sealant is applied. Now we get that guy kind of slid into place. It's a little bit of a dance. Got our oil lines fitted, and we have a tiny bit less RTV than they had on it before. What I would call the proper amount. It's kind of got a sloppy looking RTV job going on there. Guess what I'm getting at is you don't want it to squeeze out on both sides, because the stuff that squeezes into the oil pan typically ends up in the oil pickup screen. And as far as I know, blocking that thing isn't ideal. And for now, we can lower this guy back down because we're gonna be working up top for quite a bit here. So we're gonna set our head gasket in place here on our little dowels. Then with the engines in the Discovery, when we do head studs, I set the cylinder heads into place. And what I do is put the head studs in after the cylinder head is in place. There just isn't enough room with the firewall to slide the cylinder head over the head studs. Now the head studs are installed just by hand into the block. You don't want to crank on these or torque them down or anything. When we go to put the nuts on, those nuts are going to pull those threads up against what's in the block nice and tight. So this is just by hand. We got 3 long ones in the center, the rest are the short guys. And you can see we got a coarse thread and a fine thread on each side. The coarse thread is what goes into the factory block. That is what your factory head bolts look like. Fine thread, we're going to have much more torque holding capacity, just a lot more thread engagement. So that's another benefit. And then we want all our washers clean and dry. They got a little bit of oil on them from the factory, so we'll get that wiped off. And we set those on dry, and you want to make sure that the surface of the head is nice and clean. This one obviously is, because the entire cylinder head is clean. But if your heads aren't as clean, everything has to be clean and free of oil. Up to this point, you want everything clean and dry. But when we go to install the nuts, we got the ARP Ultra Torque. We'll rip that guy open. And that's going to be applied to the bottom of each nut. I never know the best way to do this. You can put it into your finger and get really messy, or you can try and not be messy. And then we put a little bit on the threads themselves. Then we just toss the nuts on, and we're just gonna run these down until they are touching. And we'll throw the driver's side cylinder head on before we start torquing. For me, it's just easier to torque them all at once to keep track of everything. But the lube is critical to getting an even torque value. That's gonna make sure everything is free spinning and you're getting a true torque value. Instead of something was dry and grabbing and binding. So the bottom of the nut's gonna slide on the washer and it's gonna glide over the threads. Get our power steering pump pushed out of the way. And get this one set into place. This one definitely would not clear if we attempted to do it with the head studs in place. You may be able to see whoever did the head gasket job last already took a hammer to the firewall to make it a little easier. It's just tight over here. And same process, we just throw our studs in by hand. Then our washers go on dry once again. Now remember, one of the rare times you do something, no lube. Then we got our nuts. Threads lubed, nuts lubed. All right, we can torque everything down now. And this is done in 3 stages. The first one is 25 foot-pounds. Second is 50 foot-pounds, then we finish off with 70. And I like using these as opposed to torque to yield stuff because we're going after an actual torque figure instead of stretching a bolt. And depending on your quality of bolt, you don't know how much stretch that is, you don't know how tight it's actually getting, and you're also spinning the bolt into the threads, into the block as you're tightening it, which in these aluminum blocks can be a risk with the threads. And the last thing we want to do is pull some threads out of the block. It becomes a real nightmare then. You got to drill it out, time insert it, which is inserting a steel thread into the block. Not exactly ideal. And like I said before, I do both heads at once just because it's easier to keep track of your 3 different stages. So we'll get the passenger side down to 25 foot-pounds. We got the first round done. I like to let this sit and settle about 20-30 minutes in between each torque sequence. Let the aluminum relax. So you get the first round done, you can take a break, or if you're ambitious, you can start putting other stuff back together. Me, myself, I'm gonna eat lunch, then we'll come back and do round 2. All right, now that we got lunch out of the way, we can go to 50 foot-pounds all the way around. As much as I'd like to sit and take another break, while we wait our 20 minutes, I think we'll throw the water pump on. I mean, I suppose we should get something accomplished every now and then. We can't just be on eternal break. Pop our new ones in. We got some assembly lube on these guys just to help them on startup. These were sitting in oil ahead of time too, so they should be good on startup. And we'll stick a little assembly lube down in where the push rod hits. This stuff's super clingy and just protects everything on a fresh startup until you see some oil pressure. You ever just kind of pull off a stupid move? Well, I did this morning. You might be able to see that big old blister on my finger, the pointer finger, you know, one you use quite a bit. Made myself coffee and somehow pulled the coffee pot off the coffee maker, placed finger on the hot pad for the coffee. I felt it right away. It was definitely hot. And it's definitely annoying when you're working with your fingers to do something like that. So highly not recommended. Don't put your finger on the coffee pot burner. But either way, our 20 minutes is up and we're ready to do our final torque at 70 foot-pounds. This is just so much nicer to do than torque to yield, can't even talk, than torque to yield bolts where you're stretching them. Can't remember exactly what the factory bolts are. It's like 15 foot-pounds, then 90 degrees and 90 degrees. I like just having an actual torque value. Call me old school. And I think we're going to be a tad more consistent with our torque values compared to the last time it was done. If you remember when we took it apart, there was like a 100 foot-pound variance in between a bunch of the bolts, which is probably why the head gasket went bad. But I also lied a little bit. That is the final torque value, but it's not the final time we're going to torque it. I like to let these sit overnight and re-torque them again in the morning. Let everything settle. It's aluminum on aluminum, aluminum threads. Stuff moves, stuff relaxes. Heck, even I relax at night. But no, so tomorrow we will re-torque everything before it gets closed back up. But we're gonna continue slapping some stuff together while we wait. We'll hit the top of the valves too. Make sure all the push rods are in place. These guys are 38 Newton meters, 28 foot-pounds for us over here. We just kind of gradually walk it down so we don't bend anything. You just want to make sure as you're doing it, all your push rods are seated top and bottom. It's really starting to look like something. I love how this guy's coming together. Everything is nice and clean. Nothing's fighting me. This is shaping up to make a nice little Rover V8. Before we start adding anything else up top and up front here, I'm gonna get the exhaust manifolds on. That way we're not fighting a whole bunch of stuff in the way. And we're back. I'm relaxed. It's relaxed. We're gonna go ahead and check our final torque. And we got a couple degrees out of some of them, so it was a good thing we went back over. Now, would it have failed if we didn't? Probably not. But either way, I think it is a good thing to do. It's not gonna hurt anything, at least. We're gonna get our valley pan cover on now. I like to throw a little RTV on our little corners here. Then we have our little rubber gaskets. We'll get those down in there. We'll put a tiny bit more on that little edge. And we can set our intake slash valley gasket. Got our little retainers. It's quite the setup they got going on here. We also have a new thermostat to go in, of course. The old one was at 91 degrees Celsius. This one is 88, so it's just a touch cooler, which is always good. You don't want to go too cool, but getting that coolant flowing a little bit earlier isn't going to hurt. Moving right along. We aren't too far off from firing this thing up. We're gonna get the valve covers on, get that end of it all closed up. Then we can start routing our wiring and getting the rest of our front drive put together. We just need that out of the way. And off camera, we assembled the front drive. I've done this many times. Didn't want to get too repetitive for you. Laid out our spark plug wires and matched them up. These guys routed. Four, two. We are getting down to the nitty-gritty. Serpentine belt time. You know, when you get to this point, you're getting pretty close. Let's see if we can remember how this is off memory. Remember off memory. Looks right. We also got a bunch of new hoses. We're making sure the cooling system is good. We're going through all the trouble of fixing the head gaskets. So it would be silly to throw the old hoses back on and have a potential failure point. and redo the problem once again. I'm probably a couple hoses short, but we're gonna get it all buttoned up together, fired up, and then I'll go through and reorder what I missed. I forgot these guys. So before it leaves here, we'll swap those out. And before Tommy brought this here, he went ahead and got himself a new coolant reservoir, so we'll install that as well. Look at that guy. Before I cover this up with the air box, a little pro tip from my years of buying Land Rover Discoveries. Right there in the front corner, you can see the ARP head stud. It is exposed and visible. You would be surprised at just how many of these we've ran across over the years at auctions and whatnot that actually have the ARP head studs installed, a higher percentage than you would think. So if you're looking at something without history, you can always just kind of peek down, and if you see that, you know there's a pretty good chance that someone knew what they were doing when they were inside playing with it. Get those back off so we can put them on the bottom again. Well, there's the air cleaner. Install those back in the bottom. Much better. We're getting pretty close to running out of parts to install back on this. Then we just have one radiator hose left. There we go. Nice. Now I'm going to leave the radiator fan off for the initial startup. That way we have a little more room to see and check everything. It'll be easier if we do have something leaking to see where that is leaking from. Once we confirm everything's good, we'll fire that guy back on. But I guess now the last thing we have left to do before we can fire it up and see if we accomplished anything is fill this up with fluids. Now I'm typically more of a no funnel, professional pouring kind of guy, but being everything is nice and clean, I guess we won't risk it this time around.
Oh, how'd you spill it all on the exhaust manifold?
Because it's underneath the oil pickup.
Now this is my preferred oil in these Rover V8s. I like the Rotella T4 15W40. It's done me well over the years. We'll go no funnel over here. It's always interesting at this point to see if your feet are getting wet because you missed something underneath. And we got no new puddles underneath. Did at least that right so far. But it's looking all tidy in there, and it is now time to put some juice to it and get it fired up. We'll check once again that there is no new puddles, and we made oil pressure pretty quick. The Vaseline trick usually helps in that case. It's gonna be a little tappety until we get some RPM to it and get those new lifters all pumped up. We're gonna top everything up, pull it outside, and let it run for a little bit. We obviously won't let it run for terribly long, being we don't have the fan installed. But everything is looking good and now sounding good. From just the time of pulling it out of the shop to here, the lifters have already quieted down. I think Tommy has a good one here, and I am super excited to see this guy back on the road. It's always a bummer when you go and buy something and have to do a major repair right away. But if you're gonna have to do that, a nice clean Discovery one is definitely something worth doing that too. We're gonna get the fan and everything buttoned back up, check it over, and then we are going to let the weather clear up. The road's getting a little better shape. Then we'll spin it around, make sure everything is working and functioning fine so that the guys can come out to Iowa and drive this back to Colorado. We do have a couple other little things to do to it before it makes that trip. The brake pedal is soft, so we have a set of upgraded stainless brake lines to install, and we're just gonna check everything over and make sure this functions as nice as it looks. But before we go, we gotta play a little Rover musical chairs. the 6.2 Discovery back on the hoist. This guy's going to the tuner this week, which is kind of funny. We're in small town Iowa, and just a few minutes away from us is a guy who is pretty good with these GMLSs and does some of the best hot rods in the country. So before it goes, we just have a couple small things to clean up, finish up. We went ahead and got the 4-inch aluminum intake made a mount for the ARB compressor in the engine bay. Then we also just took a chunk of solid billet aluminum and machined ourselves this nifty little adapter. That guy houses 2 coolant temperature sensors. We got one for the factory gauge cluster and also an aftermarket gauge. And instead of running multiple adapters, we just went ahead and made a nice fancy 2-holer. But lots of fun stuff happening around here. I appreciate you guys watching, appreciate you subscribing. Happy to have Tommy's Discovery back in working order. I'll let you know how that thing pans out here in the next coming weeks as we put some miles on it. And hopefully we see those guys make the trip out from Colorado and drive that thing back. I guess worst case scenario, we make a trip out to Colorado. Worst places to go. And I've been sitting and staring at this guy, so I think next video we'll start whipping out the roll bar and continue on with our little tray bed LR4. I think we need a bigger shop.